Okay, good afternoon. My name is Lindsay, and I'm the silviculturist on this project.
Jeremiah Maghan, fields planner.
And we're just going to give you a pretty brief overview of the vegetation and the fuels characteristics in the Big Mosquito Project area. We'll start with an existing condition, we'll talk about the fire regimes, and then we'll talk a little bit about what I've seen as the historical vegetation in the project area. So I'm going to start with the plant association groups, and I call them PAGs, but there's been a lot of questions. We've had several field trips out to the Big Mosquito area with the Blue Mountain Forest Partners, and they had a lot of questions about, like, what is a PAG, how is a PAG characterized, and what is cool moist forest? So I'm going to explain that really briefly. First of all, PAGs are defined by a grouping of plant associations, and they're grouped by temperature and moisture gradients. And in the Big Mosquito area, the vegetation characteristics are defined by elevation, aspect, slope, ash depth, historical landslide patterns, and past disturbance events. And a lot of what we see as from the vegetation in Big Mosquito is really influenced by some of the things that Hirsch and Bob have already talked about soils, ash depth, landslide activity. And here's just a publication if anybody's interested on how those PAGs were characterized. Also, there's a map up here on the wall. All the maps that are up here in the presentation are up on the wall too, so if people want to look at them later. And if they have questions or anything like that, we'll be here to answer questions. But the Cool Moist Plant Association, basically they're a grouping of, a plant association group is a grouping of plant associations, and these are the plant associations that are within the Cool Moist PAG that are within the Big Mosquito Project. And basically what it is you've got your overstory trees and your understory vegetation, and they're characterized by, you go through a key basically, and it tells you by looking at the vegetation how much is out there, what what plant association you're in. And the one thing that I just want to make note of on this slide is it doesn't take very much of some of these species to make it a cool, moist, or a very productive environment. So like for twin flower, it only takes 1% of ground cover of twin flower to kick it into a grant for a twin flower plant association. And here are basically the key species the understory species that we're looking at to define a cool, moist environment. Big huckleberry, queen cup bead lily, grouse huckleberry, twin flower, and false bugbane. And most of you have probably seen these out in the forest before. So in Big Mosquito, 93% of the Big Mosquito Project area is forested. Of that 93%, 98% of that is upland forest, and so that's the vegetation that I'll be characterizing. Out of that, 48% is warm dry, 31% is cool moist, and that's what I've been talking about as far as defining what cool moist is. 14% is cold dry, and those are lodgepole pine areas. And then there's minor amounts of cool dry, hot dry, cool wet, warm moist in the project area. And here's a map, and this map's also up on the wall. Basically it just shows the light blue is the cool moist, the brown is the warm dry, which is half of the project area, and then this purple over here is the cool dry. And it corresponds with the higher elevation lodgepole. The cool moist corresponds with landslide areas and areas of either deep ash or relatively deep ash, or high soil water holding capacity that Hirsch talked about earlier. So within Big Mosquito, as a silviculturist, we look at stand structure, and we characterize the structure. And here's kind of a diagram just explaining what we're looking at. So stand initiation, obviously, is when the stand is being initiated, so a lot of young trees. And then you go into stem exclusion, understory reinitiation, which is older trees with young trees coming up underneath, young forest multistrata, and then old forest. With the biggest thing to take note of on this slide is that the latent old structure that we define latent old structure as old forest single strata and old forest multistrata. and approximately 27% of the project area is in that category. So there's a lot of big trees out there, basically. And then here's just the map of that. So you can see that the stem exclusions are in yellow, and then the darker greens are these old forest areas. And then the browns are the stand initiation and the understory reinitiation areas, and that corresponds with the summit fire. For our analysis, silviculturists are tasked with defining the departure from the historical range of variability, so the HRV. So for the warm, dry environments, these black lines right here are basically what we have characterized as the historical range of variability for structure in the forests of the Blue Mountains. And then these red bars are where we sit in Big Mosquito. And so basically, the take-home message is for some of these structures, so like stand initiation, stem exclusion, this open canopy, we're actually right within the historical range. We have a higher historical range, we have more old forest multistrata out there than what historically would have been out there, and we have less old forest single strata than what historically would have been out there. That's what that graph means. So for the cool, moist environments too, it's broken down by plant association groups, so we have to do this for each plant association group. I'm just showing the two most frequent, which is the warm, dry, and the cool, moist. But some of the structure classes were right in the historical range, and then some, like the young forest, we have a lot less young forest than what we would have historically had, and more old forest multistrata than what we would have historically had. So here's a map of the stand density, and stand density index is a measure of density, and it's basically it's a way to kind of look at different ages and different species of trees and compare them relatively across each other. And so the take-home message for this is if the stands that are yellow are really low density, the stands that are green are generally within where we would like to manage as far as density goes, and the stands that are brown and red, which I don't think there's anything red out there, have high to extremely high densities. So a lot of the project area has very high density. There are quite a few insects and diseases that are found in the Big Mosquito Project. The major diseases include anosis and armillaria, which are root rots, and then dwarf mistletoe. There is a lot of past insect activity in this area. However, there's no outbreak levels of any insects right now. Fern engraver is pretty evident. Western pine beetle, mountain pine beetle, and spruce budworm. There was a mountain pine beetle outbreak in the 60s and 70s in the Big Mosquito Project area, and a western spruce budworm outbreak in the 90s in that area. And this really influences the fuels. There's a lot of down material from these insect outbreaks out there right now. There's approximately 25 known aspen stands in Big Mosquito. Here are some pictures of kind of representative. There's a lot of conifer encroachment in these areas, heavy browsing due to livestock and ungulates, and there are actually quite a few of them were fenced at one point in time, but those fences are falling down. There's been quite a few management actions and quite a few fires in this area historically. This map, the blue, these are all areas that have been harvested in the past, and then there's several large fires in the Big Mosquito Project area. Most people are probably familiar with the Indian Rock Fire, Summit Fire, Sharps Ridge Fire, that have occurred within the last 10 to 15 years. But there were several older historical fires too. Currently, we're actually taking quite a few management actions out in the Big Mosquito Project area for pre-commercial thinning. We have the Summit Fire Restoration Thinning Project. That's approximately 3,000 acres in the Big Mosquito Project area. It's a 10-year project that we started the first year of the project this year. It's pre-commercial thinning and fuels treatments. And then there's approximately 2,500 acres of plantations in the Big Mosquito Project, and most of those have been thinned and piled within the last several years.
Okay, talk about fire potential, and when you think about this, and I'll show you a map, we're looking at 90th percentile, so think about your August day when we have a wildfire going through here. Acres is based off just the timbered stands, so your active crown fire is where the fire will get up into the crowns of the trees and be able to sustain and run through the crowns. And looking about 16% of the project area. Crown conditional is the fire can run through the crowns, but there's not enough of the ladder fuels, the surface fuels, and the smaller trees to get it pushed up into the crowns to go. But if it does get up there, it does have enough crown density that it can run. And then the passive is you're going to have surface fire with your takeout trees, just patches, 10, 20, 50 acres, and then come back down. And then your surface fires just going to remain on the bottom. So with the map, the dark red is the active crown, and the lighter red is the crown conditional. So you can see they kind of match up and border up next to each other. So if you do get something there, what it's saying is it gets up in the crowns, it runs. Fire suppression wise, that's going to kind of be, we're going to have to back off. You're looking at some weather, it burns out of that stand, or heavy equipment opening up our fire lines to try to do some suppression action on those. So those are very difficult to suppress. The passive, which is all this yellowish color around, that's suppression-wise. You're looking at probably aircraft. You're looking at heavy equipment. Our ground resources still are going to have a hard time getting in there and doing anything. So you're looking at probably dozer lines, existing roads, but you're going to have to be taking trees out, widen that out for suppression actions. And then the lighter green here, that surface, that's when our ground crews, initial attack, can get in there and usually do some good suppression work. And most of the surface in this area down here, if you kind of match it up with her pegs, the brown, is your fire regime 1. You're getting frequent fires in there, 0 to 35 years, and it's usually low severity, and then your higher severity up through here. Sure.
Now we're going to change gears just a little bit and talk about the historical fire regimes in the Big Mosquito Project area. Based on the literature, the historical regimes, and Jeremiah just mentioned fire regime 1, but there's 3 fire regimes that occurred in the Big Mosquito Project, 1, 3, and 4. And they correspond to the warm, dry environments, the cool, moist environments, and the cold, dry, which is the logical environments. That's what the literature says. However, based on the stand structure and species composition that we were seeing in the project area, we didn't believe that to be true. And so we went out and sampled down logs and stumps. We cut out rounds, basically, and there's a couple up here as an example if people are interested, and looked at the fire scars. We looked at 6 locations across the Big Mosquito Project. We took 21 samples that we actually used in this analysis, which added up to be 61 observations. And an observation is the number of years between 2 fire scars. And what we came up with is we saw a range of fire return intervals from 2 years to 120 years, with an average of about 26 years. So basically what we found was that fire occurred much more frequently on this landscape than what scientists, or what the literature was saying, basically. We also did a patch size analysis for the Middle Fork and for the Big Mosquito Project. Eric One's the district silviculturist on Blue Mountain, looked at the 1939 aerial photos, and he mapped out 338 different fires, and he looked at the stand replacement portion of stand replacement fires and mixed severity fires. There was a total of 6,000 acres in stand replacement, some sort of stand replacement fire in the Big Mosquito Project. at that period in time. But the take-home message basically is that those fires were pretty small. Over half were 10 or less acres in size. And then here is the patch size analysis. So the purple is for stand replacement events and mixed severity fires, and then the blue is for stand replacement fires. So the last topic would be the historical vegetation, and this is just based on myself and other people out there looking at the stand structure and what the forest itself is telling us what the historical composition was out there. Basically, we've already covered there was frequent low severity fire regimes. There's several different types of forests that I found. Basically, you've got your classic open ponderosa pine stands. You've got your mixed conifer stands that were warm and dry based on our classifications, that were dominated by ponderosa pine, but then also had components of Douglas fir and western larch and grand fir and lodgepole pine. And then in the cool moist forests, which were actually relatively frequent mixed severity fire regimes, there's ponderosa pine dominated areas, and that's basically on the south slope above north of Big Creek. And then there were other stands that were dominated by western larch historically. And this is a stand that we sampled. We actually looked at the historical species composition, and from what we found, this stand was never logged. So from what we found in the stand, approximately 50% of the species, or the trees out there, were western larch. And then there's also areas, especially on the granitics, where there's western larch lodgepole pine forest historically. And then, if anybody's interested, there's quite a few references.